Next, from Springfield, Senate and House Republicans hold a press conference to unveil their budget plan. This runs about 45 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Jim Durkin. I'm the House Republican leader. In 18 days, we will close a fiscal year and start a new one. Where is the sense of urgency from Speaker Madigan to bring this budget impasse to closure? For the first time in all my years serving in the legislature, Speaker Madigan and his majority did not call a vote on a budget at the end of May. Why? These are questions we need to know. I am stating right now that we must act now to pass a negotiated, comprehensive, balanced budget with reforms to change the status quo and how we operate in Illinois and to boost our struggling economy. The time for subject matter hearings like the one that is going to start a little bit later this morning with the sole political purpose of assigning blame is over. It must come to an end. The men and women the Democrats will trot out today are being fooled. They are nothing more than human shields for the Illinois House Democrats' economic failures this past decade. Lawmakers from both parties should be in Springfield working together to get the job done once and for all. Joining me are a few of my Republican colleagues from the House and the Senate to put forth a clear path of action to end the impasse. I also want to make note that Leader Radonio is not here today because she is already on a planned family vacation. She would be here otherwise. We recognize and appreciate the hard work that has been done in the Senate by both Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans. We are essentially picking up where they left off before Senate Democrats chose to go it alone. The bills we are filing today include provisions many Democrats have said in the past that they are willing to accept, taken as a whole, and that we believe would be signed by the governor. Our comprehensive proposal includes a novel concept for Illinois Democrats. It's called a balanced budget, hard spending caps, lasting property relief, property tax relief, and changes to our regulatory system that will create jobs. It also includes term limits on legislative leaders and the constitutional officers. The package also includes pension reform and a school funding bill that takes the best from Senator Barrickman and Senator Menard's proposals. We are calling upon our Democrat colleagues in the House and Senate to join us in passing a balanced budget with reforms, not a new concept, guys, that are good for taxpayers and will put Illinois back on track to the state that we love, the state that we grew up in. We must go back to Springfield and finish our job. As I've stated all year long, if you respect our legislative priorities, we will respect yours, and we will find a common ground. However, the Speaker's members should no longer put up with Speaker Madigan's my way or the highway approach towards governing, which has lasted for decades, and it hasn't worked. I am now going to turn over this microphone to my colleagues, and they will talk more in depth about our proposals. Right now, I'm introducing Senator Dale Rauner.
Good morning. My name is Dale Rauner. I'm a state senator from the 55th District, which is all our parts of 14 counties in east central and southeastern Illinois. I serve as the minority spokesperson on the Appropriations 1 committee and had the pleasure this past legislative session of spending endless hours with a number of my Republican colleagues and Democrats working to shape the bipartisan compromise that would give us a balanced budget and reforms that has been talked about for a long period of time. Before going into what we are going to do today on the budget, I want to ask that we just spend a few seconds and rewind the tape to last month. We were in the midst of budget meetings with the Democrats, not daily meetings, 2 or 3 times a day meetings, making progress on what they thought they needed to see, what we needed to see in a balanced budget compromise. On May 17th, the Democrats walked out of the room and passed their own budget, their own spending plan. We went back and met with them again. We continued to meet with them for the next 6 days. On May 23rd, The Democrats again chose to go their own direction, even though we had meetings scheduled on budgets, on education, and on property taxes. That very day, we spent that day instead debating the Democrats' tax increase and budget proposal with no reforms, and of course, that is the one that passed. Now, our friends on the Democrat side of the aisle have talked to us incessantly, and we agree that in terms of the budget, in order to force Speaker Madigan to show any kind of pulse over in the House of Representatives with regards to a balanced budget, that we needed to send over from the Senate to the House a balanced budget package in a bipartisan nature. The Senate Democrat budget fails both tests. And so we are here again today to try once again with another compromise effort at a spending package that we hope would be bipartisan and is certainly balanced. This is what the package entails. Again, it's a balanced budget. It contains a hard spending cap of $36 billion. It achieves balance by reducing and making adjustments in spending of approximately $5 billion through reforms and reductions in spending, and pays down a portion of the staggeringly high backlog of bills that is growing every single day because of inaction on a balanced budget. Now, there's been much talk about compromise from our Democrat friends. Well, the Republicans just won't compromise. They just won't compromise. I want to give you a few areas where, in fact, where we sat down at the table with them and they said, we need to have this, and we said, okay, not necessarily because all the Republicans thought it was a great idea, but because we're trying to reach a compromise. One, pension parity, agreeing that the state will pick up the Chicago Public Schools' normal cost of their pensions. Two, we had originally proposed through the budget that Senator Bill Brady had introduced in May to reduce transit spending statewide, primarily downstate. The Democrats said, well, we don't want to see that deep of a cut. So we agreed to halve the cut. In other words, add back more spending. Three, the Democrats came to us at some point and said, there are a number of programs throughout agencies that you've suggested that we reduce. We need $130 million of those back. We agreed to that and gave back $130 million. The Democrats said, we'd like to see you means test some of the exemptions that taxpayers get right now. We agreed to that. So in this filing, in this budget, we have agreed to means testing for the standard deduction, for the credits you get for property taxes, and for the education expense tax credit. The effort here in this balanced budget filing is to pick up where the negotiations were broken off by the Democrats on May 23rd. We agree with our Democrat friends. The best way to prompt Speaker Madigan into action is to pass to the House a balanced budget that has Republican and Democrats votes supporting it. That's what this effort's about. With more information, I want to pass it on to my good friend and colleague, State Representative Patty Bellock.
Thank you very much, Dale. I'm Patty Bellock, and I'm the Deputy Minority Leader and the Minority Chair of the Human Service Group and also the Human Service Appropriate. So today we're looking at a comprehensive balanced budget that Dale just reflected on, and we're offering a full year funding for human services. I hope that this will move us forward from the partisan impasse that we have had to a bipartisan compromise today. It's not a lifeline or a stopgap measure. It's a comprehensive, balanced budget that will provide funding for our state's most vulnerable citizens. Our budget fulfills the commitment to restore the child care eligibility to 185% of the federal poverty level. It provides $35 million towards the direct support professional once a balanced budget passes. It funds Teen Reach, youth employment programs, and addiction prevention programs that we all want to see in place, especially with the heroin problems we're encompassing today. Our plan provides grant funding and regular funding for individuals with developmental disabilities, including the Autism Program of Illinois, Best Buddies, and the epilepsy programs, also the Immigrant Integration Services. With last week's court ruling, which was extremely important, on the $2 billion backlog of unpaid Medicaid bills, it's critically important that we take immediate action to address this backlog, as the judge had said in the federal court. Our plan includes a revenue bond issuance to help pay off those old bills. That's approximately $4.3 billion, not including Medicaid match. The budget bills passed by the Democrats did not include any money to help pay down the bill backlogs, whereas we, in this compromise, hope to move forward on that to help the most vulnerable citizens. It also increases the assessments levied on the hospitals from $340 million gross to $170 million net. It puts them in a better position than 3 years ago. This budget impasse cannot go on any longer. Too many of the most vulnerable citizens that we deal with every day have been put in harm's way. The consequences of not taking any action now would be absolutely devastating to all the human service providers and to the people, the most vulnerable people that we help throughout the year. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce Senator Barackman. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. My name is Jason Barackman. I am a senator from the 53rd District out of Bloomington and represent much of East and Central Illinois. I have had the pleasure of serving on the Education Committee for a number of years now. I was a member of the Governor's Education Funding Commission chaired by Secretary Purvis, and I think we're all aware of the significant discussions that have occurred over, quite frankly, many years on our school funding formula. We all believe that it's time to fix the broken school funding formula. It's important that any change to that school funding formula result in a fair and equitable system that's fair to all the students of this state, all the districts of this state, whether the students live in Chicago, suburbs, or elsewhere. The formula needs to be a statewide formula that's fair for each of those school districts, each of those students, and tries to treat each of those the same. I think there was significant progress that resulted from the Governor's Reform Commission. There were a number of areas where you saw bipartisan and bicameral agreement among the legislators. We know that in the spring we engaged in very significant negotiations. I was a part of those negotiations in the Senate, where we tried to pick up where the commission left off. We filed multiple bills. Senator Menard had his, I had mine. We had hearings on those legislation. And with today's amendments that we're filing, I think you will see widespread total agreement on a number of things related to the formula. There's agreement on the fact that we need to use an evidence-based formula that utilizes 27 elements based on best practices. We're in total agreement on how we handle poverty concentration, the tier structures, regionalization factors and adjustments to the formula, protections and safeguards for our English learners and special ed funding, how we calculate available local resources, what's in the base funding minimum. On all these areas, you'll see in today's legislation that we're in agreement. And I think we're in agreement as a result of those negotiations that occurred over the spring session. Senator Ryder talked about the fact that in late May, Democrats veered off course. They decided that they wanted to walk away from those negotiations and move forward legislation on their own. That's, in fact, what they've done. That legislation has placed us where we're at, with a lack of a bipartisan agreement. But with the bills that we're filing today on education funding, again, you'll see total agreement from both sides on all those issues just that I've outlined. That doesn't mean there's not a few areas where we need to close the gap. And that's what we try to do here today with our bills. In fact, our bills pick up from where those negotiations left off and advance ideas that are an attempt to split the difference or pull from the respective Democrat and Republican priorities that were represented in those negotiations, put it in bill form, and show where Republicans are willing to take votes. This includes the elimination of the Chicago, where we close the gap is both sides have agreed that we should eliminate the Chicago block grant, but we are proposing today that instead of not rolling some of those funds into the base, that we in fact will roll in funds for funding for children, personal reimbursement, and summer school, an attempt by Republicans to recognize the priorities expressed in those negotiations. We also tried to split the difference on how we handle a hold harmless. The Democrat proposal contemplates an indefinite hold harmless that does not go away. That is not reflective of the negotiations. So we put forward a hold harmless that rolls off over a series of years, again in the spirit of those negotiations. We propose mandate relief. Mandate relief has always been a part of the discussions, but we've removed some of the most hostile provisions of the mandate relief, leaving intact those pieces where we think there can be bipartisan agreement. And finally, we remove the notion that the state of Illinois is going to pick up CPS's legacy pension costs, but in doing so, and as alluded to by Senator Ryder, we agree to pick up the CPS normal cost for their pensions. So my hope is that we will, in the final days of this month, in the end of the fiscal year, that we will see meaningful action on this legislation that I think is now queued up and ready for bipartisan support in Springfield. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Senator McConaughey.
Good morning, Senator Karen McConaughey, representing the far western suburbs. I, like Senator Ryder and Senator Berkman in the Senate, were working on the negotiations that abruptly came to an end when the Senate Democrats decided to walk away from the table in and around the 23rd of the month. And I was working on the area of reform. And so, which is really important for the conversation that we're having about a balanced budget and the need to talk about increasing taxes, because Illinois is the single largest exporter of people, businesses, and the jobs that those businesses create. And we cannot, when there's this mad exodus out of our state, we cannot fix a fiscal crisis by simply increasing taxes on an ever-shrinking pool of taxpayers. Instead, we need to create a pathway and a direction that puts us back in an a vitally economic position that encourages businesses to come back to Illinois and to stay in Illinois, and ultimately creates jobs. So we need to acknowledge what the factors are that push businesses out of the state, that cause people to leave our state, and it's time that we address it, and it's time that we address it now. One of those is work comp, and that was one of the key issues that was involved in the negotiations that fell apart on the 23rd, and yet I will tell you, we have the 8th highest work comp costs of any state in the entire country, and we were negotiating with the Democrats at a point where we were down to the one last piece was a contextual sentence regarding traveling employee. For reasons unknown, the Democrats walked away from that and instead passed a work comp bill that was so watered down that I'm not sure why they bothered with the effort. And the idea that has been suggested on work comp that we have been unwilling to compromise, the critical issue that was on the table at the time was the medical fee schedule, which is the one area, while there was many other minor changes, that was the one area that we could offer to the business community as a true savings. Because be very clear that while the average taxpayer in Illinois may not understand what the implications of work comp are, I assure you the business owners do. And they pay attention to how that impacts their bottom line. And when you are the 8th highest, if you can reduce the cost through the medical fee schedule, it is a way to encourage businesses to stay in Illinois and increase jobs. We were very willing to compromise. There were a number of things that Republicans found that were very important to us. That included causation. Democrats didn't want to talk about that. Indemnity benefits and AMA guidelines, all things that mean something to the business community and that have been expressed as incredibly important. And in an effort to try to compromise with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we agreed to put that aside for the moment to try to reach compromise. I was at the table, many of us were at the table, and we look forward in a bill being introduced in the House, hopefully an opportunity for the Democrats to come back to the table and work on that as well. The other area is property tax reform. The governor's talked about it. Many of us, I represent the far western suburbs, we talk about this all the time, and our taxpayers talk about this all the time. We have, if not the highest, I understand we're now in competition with the state of New Jersey for the highest property taxes in the United States. Either way, we are taxing people right out of their homes. People are paying more in property tax than they are making their mortgage payment. The same applies to our businesses. So while they're looking at key indicators as to whether or not Illinois is a friendly place to do business, where they want to be here to create jobs, they are looking at work comp, but they're also looking at the property tax implication and the overall business regulation that plagues Illinois in a way that creates that exodus of businesses. So in the proposal that we have talked about, we originally wanted a permanent freeze to property tax as a way to change this conversation in a state that has more units of local government than any other in the country. And as I said, taxing people out of the home, we needed to stop the bleeding and go for a permanent tax. That was rejected by the Democrats. We worked together and agreed that we would support a 4-year temporary income tax along with a 4-year property tax freeze. That way we give people some relief with the income tax by freezing their property tax, and at the same time it forces a change in the conversation about how we govern at the local level and how do we change our strategy to reduce the cost of property taxes. We also, as a part of that, in the compromise, agreed to exempt the debt levy. We saw that as something that was important to the Democrats. We agreed to that. And last but not least, we also agreed to the idea that we need to empower people at the local level. We need to give taxpayers the ability to go to referendum and make decisions at that level about what size government do they want and how much do they want to spend on it. That proposal that we have put on the table includes the ability for taxpayers to every 4 years by referendum lowering the threshold, by referendum choosing to lower, raise, or keep their tax levy the same. We think that that is the very minimum starting point to providing relief to our taxpayers in Illinois, and that is something also that fell apart at the last moment on the 23rd. And again, this will be in proposals going to the House, and we look forward to hopefully our colleagues on the other side of the aisle joining us to continue that conversation. So I will turn it over to Representative Tom Demmer.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tom Demmer. I'm a representative from the 90th District. What you're hearing today is a series of compromises from House and Senate Republicans, both around the budget and around meaningful reforms that will improve the state. Over the last couple of years, I was a member of the Local Government Consolidation Task Force, and we looked at the increasing burden that local government costs have placed on taxpayers across the state. As Senator McConaughey mentioned, we have more units of local government than any state in the country by a long shot. That redundancy and those levels of bureaucracy add up to bring Illinois to some of the highest property taxes in the country. Our proposal for local government consolidation strengthens the already passed Senate Bill 3 and empowers citizens to initiate consolidation measures. The Citizens Empowerment Act gives the public the ability to put referendum on the ballot and have voters weigh in on whether consolidation is the right choice for their community. We're also offering pension reform, which many people would acknowledge is an important step in putting Illinois back on a sustainable path and addressing one of the largest challenges that the General Assembly has struggled with over the last several years. Our proposal in pension reform accepts Senate Bill 16, which has previously passed the Senate and includes President Cullerton's consideration model and, as was mentioned, the state's pickup of the Chicago Public Schools' normal pension costs. The plan also creates a Tier 3 hybrid approach for newly hired members and gives local governments a choice when they're adding new employees. Both pension reform and local government consolidation offer tools to lower the overall cost of government to help bring down the burden that we place on taxpayers across the state. What we've heard today is a series of compromises in the budget and in reforms. We stand together today to say that we have the time, we have the willingness, And now today we have the legislative proposals, and that House and Senate Republicans stand ready to solve this problem and to end this impasse. Thank you, and we'll take questions.
Yes.
Two questions. One, have you vetted this with the governor? If you had any kind of commitment from him that if this were to pass as proposed, he would sign it?
Yes. That's correct.
So this is, can we call this his proposal?
This is the Republican proposal, House and Senate and Governor's proposal. Absolutely.
House, Senate, and governor's proposal. Second, how much does this provide for Chicago Public Schools as opposed to SB 1?
Anybody know that?
We're, with the filing of the legislation today, we will ask the State Board of Education to provide us runs so that we can provide those numbers to you, hopefully very shortly.
Well, in general terms, is it more? Is it less?
More than SB 1?
More, is it less than SB 1?
It is more than they received last year.
Okay, but is it much?
I can't tell you specifics until I get the run, but it will be more than they received last year.
Jim, why would Madigan go for this?
Well, I guess the question is whether or not the Speaker is committed to breaking the impasse, because he needs my votes. His members are frustrated. I talked to them. There's pressure building up in the House Democrat caucus to get this to resolution. He has 67 votes. He needs at least four Republican votes, starting now, to do anything, to pass anything. So if he's committed to breaking the impasse, he needs to work with us and work with me. But if he does not talk to us nor work with us on it, to me, it is just a reflection on his desire to do nothing and to make sure the governor is the one who will be hurt next year in the gubernatorial campaign.
You say that he needs your votes, and yet here as you're weighing out the compromise on property tax relief, it says a 4-year freeze rather than a permanent freeze. As a compromise for making the Democrat pass income tax increase sunset. So are you planning to put votes on an income tax increase?
I've said for the past 2 years, and so has the governor stated, that if there are meaningful structural reforms and that there's cuts in state spending and state government, we would entertain and support revenue. And I stand by that today. It has to be the right balance, though.
You're referring to it as a Democrat pass income tax increase in your compromise outline.
I'm not familiar with that document, but the fact is, getting to the ultimate question, yes, we are prepared to do that, to work with the Democrats, to put votes on revenue on the condition that they actually work and pass what we've laid out today.
Jim, I don't want to elaborate on that. The language that you're referring to, that's the Senate. The only Democrats voted for, I believe, Senate Bill 9 in the Senate. So that refers to the passage out of the Senate. And as I think you've alluded to, we'd like to see two changes to that. One is the income tax increase. The Democrats want to make it permanent. We think it should be 4 years to match the property tax relief duration that we have put on the table and the Democrats have previously agreed to. The second change would be the Democrats want to make their tax increase retroactive all the way back to January 1st. We think that's completely unfair to taxpayers. We want to see it start when the fiscal year starts, and that would be July 1.
And then in front, you talked about spending caps, right? $36 billion. If we're willing to vote on the income tax increase, are there cuts involved in this, or what's getting cut?
Yeah, there's cuts.
There are. I mean, first of all, there are reductions, but you're saving money through pension reform. You're saving money through group health insurance. You're saving money through procurement, so that's less money we have to spend. And there is also throughout this budget across-the-board cuts, all state agencies, all 3 branches of government, in the neighborhood of 5% or a little bit less. That's how you get the rest of the savings. We recognize we're going to have to ask state government across the board to just tighten the belt.
Will these be amendments or new bills rather?
There'll be amendments that'll be filed. Well, I was waiting for the Speaker to call us back, but right now we're in the second week of June, and we absolutely no communication from him of when we're going to go back into session. And we are going to be running out of authority after July 1st. That is why, which has prompted us to do this today, to say that this is what we can accept. Even more important is, as we said earlier, he needs our votes if he truly wants to get a budget passed. He can't just do it on his own. So this will be amended today.
So amendments or new bills?
I believe they're amendments. amendments, new bills?
Some combination.
It's going to be a combination. The House is going to be introducing the reforms. The Senate is going to be introducing the budget-related bills.
When you say he can't just do it on his own, actually he can, but then the governor could veto it. So are you saying that this
No.
is what the governor would
You need 71 votes to pass anything out of the spending plan. You need 71 votes in the House. The governor, and 60 is no longer the threshold. He has 67 members. He needs a minimum 4 Republicans to be able to support him on any initiative that is going to go into effect immediately.
Okay, but are you saying that this is what the governor would need in order to be willing to?
There has to be substantial compliance with what exactly we've laid out today. Absolutely.
Can you give us an idea, Jim, of how much in this that you hand out today was in some form of the Democratic plans that moved to the Senate that had very little Republican support?
I'm going to have to let the Senate talk about that because they're the ones who.
A lot of those had zero Republican support during session.
Sure.
Yeah, to be clear, and any one of us, the three of us, could answer this from our individual perspective. But what happened again? Remind you, we got up to May 23rd. We were in negotiations. We're very close on all of these issues that we've been talking about today. For reasons that you'd have to ask the Senate Democrats, they left the bargaining table and went and passed their own bills that did not reflect what we had been agreeing to in negotiations. So there were not going to be any Republican votes because it didn't reflect what we had been negotiating in good faith.
So how much of this, what percentage of what you're proposing now was part of the Democratic plan?
What the House is going to be considering is very reflective of where we were in good faith in our negotiations with Senate Democrats. That is where the House is picking up the conversation. We think that's the good faith position to be in. We thought we were very close. We thought we were passing legislation out of the Senate that was going to be bipartisan. And for reasons that we never could quite understand, the Democrats walked away from that. We'd like to come back to that.
But the question Kristen is asking is, how much of that plan that you had agreed to remains in this plan?
Yeah, so let's take it as an example, the education proposal. And to pick up though on the question, sure, but think of this to your question. The Democrats had 3 choices in the Senate, right? They could have introduced legislation that reflected an agreement with Republicans. They clearly did not do that. Alternatively, they could have introduced legislation that they suggested reflected the negotiations, but were, even though there wasn't an agreement, was as far as they would be willing to go. They clearly did not do that. Instead, they did choice 3, which is their own proposal, their own starting points. And so we have picked up from where those negotiations were. We kept saying they were very close. We have picked up from there, and now are introducing legislation designed to close the gap on those remaining items.
With no tax hike, I mean, there's a huge difference between the two proposals. You wouldn't put any votes on a tax hike, so why would you expect a different outcome than the Democrats on May 23rd saying you're leaving it when you kept standing up and objecting?
Well, I want to first, I guess I'm going to challenge a little bit the premise of your question about we weren't going to put any votes on a tax increase. As has been said at this podium, as has been said at dozens of podiums for, 2.5 years now, Republicans are willing to agree to new revenue in exchange for some other things for taxpayers. If you're going to dig deeper into taxpayers' pockets, I think it's reasonable to expect that they be given a little more control over their government or a little more economic opportunity. So with all due respect, that's never been said by the Republican leadership. In terms of the budget, your question about, there's nothing in the budget that will be filed today that either wasn't in the previous filing by Senator Brady or has been talked about at the table. There's nothing new in here. But there's a critical difference here, and I want to highlight this because this is an example of part of the reason of why we're in the position we're in today. What Republicans talked about at the table for the entire month of May, and what was in Senator Brady's budget filing, was a savings of $435 million for changes to the state employees group and health insurance program. The governor has proposed, in Republican support, changing the benefit structure to save cost for taxpayers to the tune of $435 million. The Democrat-passed budget incorporates the $435 million in savings, so they count it, but makes no changes to the actual program, which is a little like saying, you know, my utility bill is $200 a month. I want to save on my utility bill, so I'm going to write the utility company a check for $150. You didn't save anything, you just put the extra $50 over for the next year. So the Senate Democrat budget adds to the backlog of bills by saying we're going to save on group health insurance, but we're not actually going to change the program. That is a critical distinction here. That can be the difference between a balanced budget and not a balanced budget.
Senator, a follow-up question on the education piece of this, whichever one of you wants to do it. How do you run a school district if at any point in time a majority of voters, most of whom may not have their kids in the school, can decide to cut taxes as much as they want? How could you run a government? How can you run a business? How can you run anything without stability?
I'm not sure where you're going there.
Referendum, people can cut the property tax?
The formula is designed to reflect the fact that every school district has varying levels of available local resources. As those change, the formula will react to it. It's an example of fixing the inequities that exist today.
But doesn't your proposal say that by referendum, voters in a school district could vote to cut their property tax?
Yes, we have.
How do you get stability? How do you run a district? The financial base can be undercut at any point by whoever decides to show up at the ballot box.
This is simply about local empowerment. This is about allowing taxpayers who currently are being taxed out of the very communities that they live in, whether they're first-time buyers or they're retirees, they can't afford to stay in the communities that they are in. We have enough faith in local taxpayers that, given the opportunity to engage their local level school boards in a discussion about the cost of education, because we spend different amounts to educate our kids in different communities, but to allow people at the local level to make a determination about how much they want to spend on education is what we're talking about here, is to change that conversation that allows taxpayers to have that discussion with their local school boards, because right now there isn't anything in place that creates that opportunity.
If you're local taxpayers, then why not submit all of your state tax stuff to a referendum repeal option 2?
Oh, well, we can talk about that.
I'm for that.
Sure.
I'm for that. You bet. Yes.
You mentioned that, you know, the issue here is whether or not the speaker wants to end this impasse.
Yes.
If, for whatever reason, there is no meeting of the minds before July 1st, or, for that matter, into the end of the year, who do you believe the voters will blame for? Do you believe they will blame Mike Madigan? Do you believe they will blame the governor?
I'll speak for myself. For the past 2 years, the Republicans have been working with the Democrats on reforms year after year. These are what the governor campaigned on when he ran for office and what he's promised Illinois voters. He's also said that if we are going to ask more of Illinoisans every April, they need to see a return off the investment, which they haven't received in many, many decades. So the governor has made it very clear that what he needs to be able to perfect a balanced budget that is responsible, that reflects the values of people in the state of Illinois. It requires more work than just passing a budget with a state tax increase. It's just not going to happen. The governor has been consistent on that, but every time that we try to work with the Democrats in good faith, look at these working groups over the past 2 years. They lead us down a path and then they pull the rug out from underneath us in May. The governor is trying to bring resolution to the problem we have in the state of Illinois. Our business community is struggling. We are asking for reforms in the business community. I'm not sure how many opportunities down the road we'll have we'll have the ability to have these actually completed. So this is the time to do it. We will work with the Democrats, but the fact is, if we walk out at the end of the month, I'll speak for myself, it's because of the Democrat leadership in the House of Representatives who do not want to work with Republicans to break the impasse.
And it will be the governor who decides how much reform is enough.
You're looking at it right now.
Do any of you up there believe that it is possible to balance the budget and get the state's financial situation in order without a tax increase?
I think it'd be very difficult. I'm going to be perfectly frank with you.
So don't you all also want a tax?
I don't want a tax increase, but the fact is we got to pay our bills. We have to be responsible and we have to be honest with Illinoisans. And that's why I'm saying if we're going to ask more of them every April, we sure as heck better do a better job of returning the investment to them based on reforms and also the things which we've laid out, which is a property tax increase. I wish we didn't have to pass a tax increase, but the fact is when you're sitting on $12 billion of unpaid bills, you have budgets that have gone awry based on the Democrats' budgeting over the last 3 years, $7 billion out of balance, $4 billion out of balance. That's what creates this backlog of bills. So the fact is we can't be deadbeats. We have to be responsible. We're going to have to take tough measures. But as I said earlier, I'm prepared to put votes on revenue in exchange for the Democrats working with us to complete what we have on these boards.
But that's you're putting that out as like that's the Democrats want the tax increase and you're willing to give them the tax increase, but now you're saying you also want the tax.
Look, I'm not going to do it the way in which they want it, like they did 5 years ago or 6 years ago, which is basically a tax increase with absolutely no strings attached that did nothing to solve the problems in the state of Illinois. Most of that money went to pay the pension systems, but the fact is it's a matter of last resorts, but I am prepared to take that up and work with the Speaker on new revenue on the condition that he is going to substantially comply with what we are going to be filing today with respect to budget and also reforms.
So is this an all or nothing deal, like if Democrats want to throw out term limits and government consolidation?
We'll have to make that decision as this time comes, but I will just say this, based on my discussions with the governor, that I use the word substantial compliance. We are not going to go in and say that we're going to have reform light or anything that is significantly diluted, and that will be based on how if they counter us on any of these measures. We'll have to make a decision at that point. But again, I'm just going to state that the Democrats need to substantially comply and support what we are proposing today, and we will work with them to fix and get this impasse over with once and for all.
Just one last thing. One last thing on that, I apologize, is you asked a question about, is this the bottom line? These filings are compromises. I mean, let's put this in context. The budget that Bill Brady introduced in early May was a compromise based on what we had been hearing from the Democrats. This budget filing is a compromise. The other filings with regards to property tax and with regards to workers' compensation and those issues are already compromises. We're putting on paper what the Democrat majority said they needed in the meeting. So we are already there. They just need to come across the table and meet us halfway. Thank you.
Thank you.